When we achieved and the new world dawned, the old men came out again and took our victory to remake in the likeness of the former world they knew. We stammered that we had worked for a new heaven and a new earth, and they thanked us kindly and made their peace. T. E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, wrote those words about the hopes raised by the Allied victory back in 1918. And they apply equally to the aftermath of the revolution in Independence Square in Ukraine. For almost 3 months, the crowds here faced down enormous dangers to campaign against an authoritarian leader. They braved snipers' bullets, they braved the brutality of the security forces, they withstood one of the harshest winters in the world, and in the process, dozens of them were killed and hundreds wounded. And now that they've succeeded in bringing down the old order, the question is whether their victory will be upheld and the ideals that they fought for of a new democratic Ukraine will be achieved. The demonstrations began last November when President Viktor Yanukovych rejected closer ties with the European Union in favour of taking $15 billion from Russia instead. In January, the government passed 9 draconian security laws, banning most forms of public protest. From then on, the rallies became a head-to-head confrontation between Yanukovych and hundreds of thousands of protesters determined to bring him down. But for every demonstrator on the barricades, many more Ukrainians were helping by providing food, medicine, or winter clothes. Every public building taken over by the protesters soon acquired dormitories and clinics. One even had a library filled with donated books. This huge support system, relying on the generosity of countless Ukrainians, kept the protests going throughout the depths of winter. But the bloodiest day of all came on Thursday, February the 20th, when snipers opened fire on the demonstrators in the square. With clinical precision, they shot down dozens of people. Together with my colleagues from the Telegraph, I counted 29 bodies on that day when gunfire echoed across Kiev. But the protesters stood firm. Even as live rounds cracked over their heads and comrades were cut down around them, they stayed in the square, defiant and exposed. There was no stampede, no panic, and no retreat. When the killing finally ended, the demonstrators were still masters of the Maidan, as all Ukrainians know Independence Square. Yanukovych had failed in his last, ruthless bid to crush his enemies. After this, he had no option but to abandon his struggle and flee Kiev by helicopter. Late on Friday, the 21st of February, the protesters were able to take control of Parliament, the Cabinet building, and the President's own office. The following morning, I visited Ukraine's version of 10 Downing Street, once Yanukovych's last heavily guarded stronghold, now empty and abandoned. Meanwhile, Ukrainians discovered the scale of their fallen leader's venality and corruption. His private residence was open to the public, exposing its antique furniture, luxury car collection, and even a mock Spanish galleon. But no one celebrated Yanukovych's downfall. On the contrary, thousands of people gathered in a Maidan to remember their dead. The square was transformed into a scene of mourning, with flowers laid at all the places where people had been killed by snipers' bullets. After all their sacrifice, the demonstrators feared the promise of their revolution would be squandered, either by their own politicians or by Russia, infuriated by Yanukovych's downfall. In fact, Russia's response came faster than anyone expected. Only 6 days after the revolution, Russian troops fanned out across Ukraine's southern region of Crimea, capturing every key installation and blockading Ukraine's own armed forces inside their barracks. Pro-Russian protests took place in Crimea, provoking a furious reaction from Crimeans who wanted to stay part of Ukraine. Within 24 hours, Russia had seized de facto control over Crimea, grabbing 10,000 square miles of recognized Ukrainian territory. At a stroke, Russia has begun the most serious confrontation with America and the West since the Cold War. After a revolution designed to achieve democracy, its first exercise will be a referendum due on Sunday intended to give an appearance of legitimacy to the Kremlin's seizure of Crimea. Meanwhile, the people of the Maidan can only look on as Russia does its best to stifle the promise of their revolution.